Chapter 39. On the run. So, it's like a GF? Rinoa asked, tilting her head curiously. Not like a GF. It is a GF. Zell corrected. His name is Doom Train. Odin swears up and down that he's half-synthesized. I don't know if it's true though. Doom doesn't like talking much. He just kind of grunts a lot. He and Ifrit get into contests. Alex thinks they're silly. Rinoa laughed. The sound of it was almost unheard under the powerful winds of the sandstorm beating ruthlessly at the sides of the ship. It was the third such storm they had endured in the 4 days they had been on this small desert island. Quistis said the proximity of the ocean was causing gale force winds that brought about frequent sandstorms. Luckily, the airtight Ragnarok had very few problems even despite the sand particles beating at it near constantly. Which was exactly the reason they were here. The constant storms meant that no one lived here. And the danger of them meant that the Estharian army was less likely to come close if they tracked them down. Which was all too possible. They had spotted the fleet a few times in the distance. However, the small desert island, aside from the crazy weather, was also comprised of high cliffs on all sides. The seeds were as isolated as was possible to be on Gaia. They were also confined inside a lot because of the frequent storms. Which meant that they were all getting very well acquainted with each other. Rinoa had never been this intimate with a group, and even the seeds were only used to one roommate at a time. They were friends and family though. It took some adjustment, but they were working through it as any family did. Quistis had made herself a small, cozy little home in the locker room. After raiding the supplies of the Ragnarok, she had created a bed from an emergency raft, used a fire blanket to sleep under, and was just making the area more homey. Zell had crafted a fort from the spare bedding materials in the cargo hold with a frame made from the ship itself and spare parts. His bed was composed of sacks of flour they had found in the small kitchen under a hatch in the crew room and more spare bedding. He claimed he was happy with the arrangement. Selfie and Irvine shared a living space in the small room off of the hangar. After the first night, and Squall after lectured them about roommate etiquette, they were pretty quiet about their nighttime activities. Everyone still chose to always go through the engine room rather than run the risk of walking in on something by going through that room. Squall, as the leader of their little band, had been given the crew room with the proper cots and privacy lock on the inside of the door. Rinoa stayed with him. Despite Irvine's innuendos and Zell's teasing, they did nothing like what Selfie and Irvine got up to in the privacy of their room. Well, not nothing. Oftentimes, they would end up holding each other through the night. Sometimes, nothing more than that. Other times, they would make out until they were breathless. Exploring each other. Exploring these feelings that were new to both of them. Taking things as slowly as they wished and savoring every kiss on the way. For Squall, it was leaps and bounds ahead of where he had been. For Rinoa, it was about the simple comfort and closeness of having him there. Her very own night. So it was the most cut off they had ever been. The poorest, most desperate. They had no luxuries here. There wasn't even the promise of food. But it was happy. And it was comfortable. And at one point everyone had all fallen asleep in the crew launch area after talking and laughing for hours on end. Which was where Zell and Rinoa were now. Talking and laughing while the sandstorm slowly died down outside of the incredibly strong windows. So you got 3 GF now, hey? Rinoa leaned against the seat she was sitting side saddle on. Zell, butt planted on the floor, nodded happily.
I kind of stole it from Odine's lab, but it's whatever. Doom assures me he's happy to be out. I mean, I think that's what he's saying. Like I said, mostly grunts.
Hey, you two, Irvine called out as he walked into the room.
Quistis is using Pandemona to calm the storm so we can go outside. Why are we going outside?
Rinoa asked curiously.
We're running low on food supplies. I'm doing the best I can, but I can only thin out water soup so long before it's just water. Squall wants to see if we can go foraging for anything to eat. We've seen monsters here, we know they exist. So we're going hunting. Maybe we can get some meat? At least some cacti. Those are edible. Never tried them, but I hear they're edible. Okay, I'll come with you.
Zell stood up quickly.
I've been dying to get out and get moving. Cool. We're meeting downstairs. Quistis is going up to the airlock to get a better grip on the storm. She says with Cats and Panda to hold back the weather and Zero to amplify their magic, she should be able to hold it at bay for a few hours. Awesome. I'm gonna go get my gloves. I left them in my fort.
Zell ran excitedly from the room, happy to be able to leave the ship for a while.
I guess that leaves me and the girls to hold down the ship,
Rinoa smiled.
Yeah,
Irvine grinned.
Selphie said she's going to start going through the ship's programs and engine. Esthar has the ability to track the ship. Until we figure out how and disable it, they're going to keep catching up to us. So if we want to go into proper hiding, we need to find that tracker and get rid of it. Oh.
So Quistis would be stopping the storm and Selphie would be tracking the tracker.
Well, I guess I'll help Selphie.
Irvine made a face.
What? Not a good idea. I didn't really say that. But, no it's not. Why not?
Rinoa put her hands to her hips, frowning at him.
I can help. Selphie's the only one who knows the programs. And she has them all set perfectly to her preferences at this point. She doesn't want anyone messing with it and risk making the ship unflyable or something. Then I'll help with the engine. Irvine. It's not me. Okay, it is me a little bit. Selphie and I are the only ones with mechanical experience. And this engine is super complex. I don't think someone without the skills should be touching it. This ship is all we have. We can't risk breaking it.
Rinoa tossed up her hands, looking out into the slowing storm in frustration.
Sorry, Rinoa,
Irvine made a face.
Look, I gotta get going. Plenty of cacti and monsters to hunt. I'll bring you back something special if we find it. Later.
He ran from the room. Rinoa crossed her arms, letting out a puff of air. Then that was it. Everyone was being useful except for her. She was trying, of course, but there was only so many times she could clean the ship. Rinoa had never felt more useless, more like a princess in her life than she did right now. Sighing, Rinoa sat down again on the lounge chairs. The seat belt was biting into her back, but she didn't really care. Was there nothing she could do? Was she just supposed to sit back in the airship, pretending to keep cleaning it while everyone did something actually important? At least back when she had been the Owl's princess, she had been coming up with plans and doing stuff. She sat there so long, she saw the boys coming around the ship again. They looked like they were chasing a quickly fleeing cactus? What the hell? Sighing, Rinoa pushed herself up and walked from the room. She supposed she could find something to clean. Again. She could hear Selfie clinking around in the engine room. Quistis was busy in the airlock keeping the constant storms at bay. The boys were hunting. Squall was still trying to plan out a course for them to follow. Rinoa was really the only one doing nothing. All this power she had inherited, and she wasn't even sure she knew how to use it. She had cast only one spell by herself at this point. A healing spell, on Squall. And, to be perfectly honest, she didn't actually know how she had done it. Rinoa stopped on the catwalk, leaning against the rail and looking down over Zell's fort. She looked down at her hand, frowning at the familiar lines there. She knew she was a sorceress now. She had felt her own power when she had healed Squall. She had been acutely aware of it when Ultimecia had been the one using it. That sorceress knew much better than Rinoa how to use this magic. Rinoa just kind of had it. Should she feel different? She didn't really. She was one of the last two sorceresses on the planet, and by virtue of that she was the second most powerful person alive. Adele had her beat, though she didn't know by how much. Shouldn't she feel at least slightly different? She still felt very human. She still felt weak. She felt more useless than ever. If she tried to call it forth, would the magic even respond? Was that how it worked? Rinoa sighed and moved her finger out. She told Diablos not to help. If she was really a sorceress, she should be able to do this on her own. Pointing her finger, she began twisting it in the air, calling on an element that Diablos, and therefore she, did not have access to. In the dry desert air, it was rather difficult. The small ball of water still condensed and swirled lazily in the air before her. It was actually pretty easy. Though it required concentration, it was almost just as simple as telling Diablos to cast magic. Without the bindings of his affinity. "You better not get rid of me," Diablos yelled loudly. Rinoa laughed. Of course not. She would never do that to him. He was one of her dearest friends. She knew that she had hated the sensation of him in her head initially, but she was more than used to it now. Diablos felt like he was part of her. It felt more strange to remove him at night than it did to have him junctioned all day. "Now, let's see how big we can make this water ball." Zell was the first to test the cactuar they had chased nearly halfway across the island. After Irvine had carefully removed all the needles and Squall had sliced a limb in half, Zell had brought it to his mouth and eagerly bit into the slightly juicy flesh. Squall and Irvine watched him carefully as he chewed. He was silent for a long moment, thinking as he moved the unfamiliar veggie around his mouth.
"So?"
Irvine prompted.
"How is it?"
Zell swallowed and licked his lips.
"You know, altogether not bad. It would probably taste even better cooked."
He took another bite, chewing happily.
"All right, we'll do more hunting and keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't die."
"What?" Zell choked.
"I'm sure you'll be fine,"
Squall said calmly.
"Tell us if you start feeling weird." "You both suck,"
Zell grumbled, crossing his arms. He looked at the cactus for a long moment before taking another, defiant bite. Squall and Irvine finished slicing the cactuar before storing it in Irvine's satchel. It couldn't go into Squall's inventory. Organic material couldn't be stored in such a way. So everything they hunted they had to actually carry around. Squall started scanning around again for something else to attack. Shiva was screaming in fury at him for forcing her into a desert. Simply put, it was hard for her to keep him, and therefore herself, cool in such a dry, hot place. The poor girl was miserable here. Ifrit, on the other hand, had never been so happy. Zell was beaming as he walked around, completely unaffected by the arid desert. He was as happy as Shiva had been in Trabia. And the surrounding ocean only made the sights that much more beautiful. They caught a few more cactuars as they worked their way around the island, eventually stopping at the edge of one of the high cliffs. Zell stretched as they took a break on the rocky ground that surrounded the sandy inner portion of the island.
I think that should be about 9 or 10 cactuar,
Irvine smiled into the bulging sack.
That should be plenty. Kind of sucks that there's nothing else on this island though. We might get to sample some other foods soon,
Squall said darkly.
Hey? Why?
Irvine and Zell stood, walking over to his side. Squall pointed out into the water where they could see a fleet of Esthar ships making quickly for the island.
Oh, yeah. The storm is calm. They're probably going to try getting here before it blows them off again.
Zell frowned.
Think we should worry?
Squall thought for a long moment. So long as the Ragnarok could continue to be tracked, Esthar was going to keep coming after them. This island was great for holding them off thanks to the wild weather, but Squall wasn't sure how long they could survive on cactuar alone.
Let's get back to the ship and have Quistis call the storm back.
Irvine and Zell nodded and they began walking once again through the sand. They hadn't gone very far when they spotted another cactuar standing still on the sand innocently.
Want to grab it?
Zell asked.
My bag can't carry more,
Irvine frowned. Squall shrugged.
We'll just carry it by hand. We don't have the luxury of turning down food.
Pulling out his blade, Squall started towards the little monster. Cactuars weren't hard to fight. Mostly they were just skittish. This one wasn't even facing him though. It shouldn't be a problem at all to take it down in one swipe. Squall drew back his blade. Crunch. Squall blinked, staring in confusion at the way his punishment had caught in its skin. Cactuars didn't have tough skin. What they? Slowly, the cactuar turned. Its large black eyes stared at him. Squall frowned at the mustache. It had a curly mustache. Hopping, the cactuar jerked free. Jumped back. Got bigger?
What they?
Squall fell back as the cactuar grew. Larger than the standard. High above their heads, reaching into the sky. It gave the squeaky cactuar call, but it was low and thrumming. The cut Squall had given it became little more than a scratch against its massive body. Lifting one crooked leg, the cactuar went to squish Squall under its large body. Jerking himself awake, Squall barely dodged in time. He rolled against the sand and came up, looking with wide eyes at the enormous cactuar in front of them.
So that's a thing that just happened?
Irvine said, dropping his bag. He pulled his gun from under his coat as Zell lifted his hands.
I think that might be too much food for us,
he grimaced.
Squall. Just bring it down,
he ordered, dodging another squishing attempt. The cactuar had taken that strike personally and was now chasing Squall determinedly.
Let's find out what cooked cactuar tastes like,
Zell laughed, his fists blazing.
Fira.
Shot from his gauntlets, the stream of fireballs crashed against the cactuar's body, singeing its bright green flesh. Angry, the cactuar turned to him.
That's right, big boy.
Zell circled around, giving Squall time to get up.
Come and get you some.
The cactuar stopped. All limbs just stopped moving. Zell frowned. Then cried out in fear as the entire GF came tumbling down, intent on crushing him with its large face. He sprinted away, barely avoiding getting crushed. Irvine was pelting it with AP ammo, but the cactuar had very thick skin.
All right, let's try this.
Grinning, Irvine reached into his mind and took hold of his friend.
Cook him up good, Barry.
Bubbling ooze, like swamp water, Tonberry unfolded himself from the ground. All the others saw was the swamp water bubbling up from the sand. Only Irvine got to enjoy the sight of the funny little guy walking up to the cactuar. His tiny chef's knife glinted in the light of the lantern that remained visible to all. They watched that light close in slowly on the cactuar. The cactuar danced in place, watching it with wide, black eyes. It watched everything with wide, black eyes. Doink. Thrashing, twisting, the cactuar dropped as the knife nearly ripped it in half. Irvine was doubled over, laughing his guts out because it was so comical to him that such a tiny little thing could be so very deadly and painful.
Oh, I love that little weirdo!
He yelled happily. In his head, Tonberry was making a squeaky little sound that Irvine had always assumed was a purr.
Diamond dust!
Shiva's ice shattered through the cactuar, shredding it. Screaming in pain, it turned, whirring up its arms.
Needles!
Zell warned. All three men scattered. Getting hit by a single needle by a cactuar was no big deal. They never only shot one. The little ones had been throwing hundreds, if not thousands of them. This enormous one sent a hailstorm of needles after them. Running around, trying to avoid the storm, they darted around the monster, under its legs, around its back.
Quake!
Irvine yelled, throwing his magic. The ground started shaking under its feet. The needle rain stopped as it tried to keep its balance. Zell turned and threw 3 more fireballs at it.
Hit him again, Barry!
Irvine yelled, summoning his GF. Squall lifted his punishment and let out a series of quick shots, spearing the enormous cactus with spires of ice that cut through its large body. The cactuar cried, thrashing about. Irvine aimed and fired. Though he preferred actually casting Quake, he found he could attach it to his bullets. The result wasn't shaking ground, but vibration. Not just a gentle thrumming either. The magic had torn monsters apart by vibrating them so hard. His bullets smashed into the cactuar and it began bucking wildly. The ice shattered, the splinters cutting it further. Zell bashed his fists together.
Here we go, baby!
Running forward, he cried out as he began pounding against the cactuar. His fists and legs became blurs as he bashed them against the cactuar. Pounding through one of the large legs. Bruising the skin, then breaking through. Zell was covered in cactus guts as he beat his way through. The cactuar jumped back. Looking at them, it started retreating slowly.
It's getting away,
Irvine warned.
No, it's not.
Squall charged. The Renzokuken was a speed-based special of gun blade mastery. He had never used it before against such a creature as this. He jumped up, going for the head where his first initial cut was still marring its thick skin. Using that as an entry point, much like Zell had done, he began slicing and beating his way through. Since he wasn't on the ground as Zell had been, the Cactuar couldn't back away from him. It twisted, thrashed, and danced to attempt to escape, but Squall was faster, more nimble. He kept up with the monster easily, staying on its head as he beat his way through. He stabbed forward, embedding his blade into the Cactuar's body. Then he jumped down and pulled the punishment down with him. The Cactuar cried out as Squall's boots hit the ground. He burst into a series of pink energy balls and flew away from him.
It's a GF!
Zell gasped. The balls ran away and hid behind Irvine, the only one of them who had been laughing and having a good time. They reformed and a small Cactuar poked its head out from behind his coat. Irvine blinked at him, grinning.
Well, hello there, little guy.
The GF squeaked, twisting its arms at Squall angrily.
Yeah? What are you gonna do about it?
Squall asked, resting his punishment against his shoulder. The GF shot a spike that Squall dodged easily.
Why you?
He took a step forward. The Cactuar squeaked and burst back into energy. He flew into Irvine's palm, then up into his head, where he cowered unhappily.
Ah, you scared the little thing,
Irvine said, reaching up to stroke his head like he might be able to pet him through his skull.
He almost killed us,
Squall pointed out calmly, resheathing his gunblade.
He says you started it,
Irvine grinned, pointing to him.
I can end it, too.
Squall took another step his way.
Hey, hey!
Zell stepped between them, laughing.
Come on, it's all good. You guys are just getting a little heatsick. Let's get back to the ship and cool off.
Growling, Squall was inclined to agree. If he had to stay out in this heat any longer, he was probably going to melt along with Shiva. They were not made for the desert. The three of them had chased the first Cactuar further than they thought. The desert island wasn't all that big, but it was filled with rolling sand dunes that had to be climbed nearly constantly. After 4 days out here, the Ragnarok was nearly half buried in sand. The bay doors couldn't open fully. They had to duck under the top to get inside. Squall closed them again gratefully. The air conditioning within the Ragnarok was incredibly good.
I've got sand in places I don't want to think about,
Zell made a face, stretching.
I'm taking a shower before I start crusting.
Squall nodded. He wouldn't say no to a shower himself. A freezing one. As they were walking towards Irvine's room, feeling safe going through since they knew where one of the pair was, they heard loud squealing and laughter. The three of them shared a look before walking quickly, following the sound.
What they?
Zell nearly dropped when they stepped into the hangar. Squall's eyes widened, blinking at what he wasn't sure he was seeing. Irvine paused, unsure what to say about the enormous sphere of water taking up the majority of the room in the hangar, swallowing up the catwalk overhead and swirling gently in the air.
So, that's a thing,
he finally settled for saying.
Selfie.
Squall squinted. Swimming inside the ball, having stripped down to her underwear in order to do so, Selfie was playing like a dolphin in the ocean.
Did she do this?
Zell asked, pointing. Squall shook his head.
No way could she do this.
He stepped closer, squinting harder. It was a little hard to see because the catwalk was providing a dark background, but was that
Rinoa?
The three of them stopped just under the swirling mass. She was in the center of the ball, her hands held out as she pulled more water inside. She had a large grin on her face as she spun around, her hair floating around her face majestically. She too had stripped down to her underwear for lack of a swimsuit. It was the first time Squall had ever seen her so nude.
I got nothing,
Zell shrugged.
What do you think?
They had to step back in order to see Quistis. She was standing up on the catwalk, at the edge of the large sphere. She was pulling her skirt off, getting ready for a dip herself.
What is this?
Squall asked, baffled.
Rinoa wanted to test her powers, so she tried to summon water. It, kind of got out of hand. Come on in, you can totally breathe inside there. What?
Irvine frowned, confused.
Yeah. Rinoa's doing something to the water. She's trying to push her limits, see what she can do. Just jump on in. It's fun.
Laughing, Quistis pulled her clip from her hair before running into the orb. She pushed off of the catwalk and turned to swim down, joining Selfie.
Was
all Irvine could come up with. Laughing, Zell was already stripping down to his boxers. He jumped up into the orb and barely made a splash. The water droplets came back up into the sphere as he swam through.
Oh, what the hell?
Irvine laughed, starting to pull off his clothes as well. Squall was staring at Rinoa. At the bright expression on her face. Reaching up, he pulled the jacket from his shoulders and dumped it onto the ground with everyone else's clothing. Irvine's heart-studded boxers were disappearing into the water by the time Squall had stripped down to his own, pitch-black shorts. He jumped up, following the others inside. The weightless feeling that came over him was similar to flying in space, but now he actually had something to push against. He swam up, ignoring the others who were playing a game of tag in the water. He took in a breath. The water was liquid when it hit his tongue, but something happened in his throat and it was only air that expanded in his lungs. The gas he breathed out became a stream of water again. He didn't know what Rinoa was doing, but it was incredible. Curious, he stopped in front of her. Rinoa turned to him, her eyes dancing. Eyes that almost immediately traveled down the length of his body. Damn, he was sexy. Muscular thighs, a rock-hard chest, and arms of steel. Why didn't she have her hands on him constantly again? Since she was taking a look, Squall felt no shame getting a few stares in himself. While he would prefer the first sight of her body to not be around the others, he wasn't going to complain that he was getting to gaze at it. Her underwear was plain black, functional. Simple boy shorts that clung to her hips and a bra that cupped those breasts he liked so much with just a touch of lace at the edge. The smooth dip of her waist begged for his hands. He could still remember how smooth her thighs had felt in his palms and he wanted to feel them again, with her muscles trembling as he ran his fingertips up the silky smooth flesh up towards her core and down again. She wasn't immune to these thoughts. Their connection reverberated the desire across her entire body and she felt a small electric jolt, almost like he was touching her. As the others played around in the hangar below, Squall took Rinoa's arm and pulled her up over the rail. He pressed down against her, pushing her onto the catwalk as his mouth began ravishing hers. The water that swirled around them only made the sensations better as their bodies became weightless. She arched her hips up, wrapping her legs around his waist. His hand found the curves and slid down and around, cupping her bottom and jerking her up against him even as she was pulling his head down to kiss her harder. Squall cursed, knowing the others were just below. He couldn't have her here, not like this. But he could certainly kiss her until they were both panting and delirious. He might have kept going even despite the others' proximity, except that Rinoa begged him to stop. She needed to concentrate to keep her magic going. She could already feel herself losing control, and if she let go now the entire ship would be flooded. Which would be bad. So at the threat of losing the airship, Squall released her. Unwillingly. Rinoa kept hold of him as he stood though. She ended up sitting in his lap as he turned and perched on the rail of the catwalk. She looked down at the others, grinning. One of them had found a ball somewhere and they were playing some weird, improvised underwater ball game. Apparently there were no fouls either, they were playing rough. Rinoa rested her cheek against Squall's as the others played around. "I like it just like this," she said. "So do I," he responded, tracing circles on her hip with his thumb. The blaring of the ship's alarm system caught them all by surprise. Rinoa almost lost control of her sphere, some of the water splashed to the deck as the sphere wobbled for just a second. "Shit! Esthar!" Squall released Rinoa and swam down the catwalk. He burst from the sphere and ran from the room to the cockpit. The lift-up was almost too slow and he vaulted himself up over the rest of the way, dripping water everywhere as he sprinted to the front. His hand clenched against the leather of the navigator's seat. Shit! The storm hadn't come back and Esthar had come in too close. The ship's proximity sensors had gone off because the Esthar vehicles were almost on top of them. He didn't see their army yet, but he wasn't willing to risk it. Squall! Selfie, her hair sticking to her head, jumped onto the floor before the lift finished its ascent as well.
"Get us out of here!"
Squall ordered. She was already throwing herself into the driver's seat. She grabbed hold of the controls as she brought the engine back to life. The sand was dragging them down. The Ragnarok wasn't ready for the sudden liftoff. Squall ran back down the lift and into the hangar. Rinoa was stepping from the water orb, looking at him with wide eyes.
"It's my fault, isn't it?"
she asked, trembling.
"I distracted everyone." "It's no one's fault,"
Squall promised, taking her by the shoulders.
"Irvine! You there?" "Right here, Commander,"
he yelled from below.
"Try to shift some of the sand off of us. Zell." "Yo! Stand by the door release."
Zell ran to the button immediately. Irvine dropped, putting his hands to the ground. He was reaching out with the brother's power, touching each grain of sand.
"Quistis! Give me a storm!"
Squall yelled. From the other side of the orb, he heard her yell the affirmative. Tracking water, Quistis ran back through the crew cabin to the airlock. She was calling on Pandemonia's power before she was releasing the overhead hatch.
"Panda, I want a huge tornado!"
Quistis yelled, throwing out his power. Her eyes shined bright purple as he responded to her call. Her wind power and Irvine's earth power combined and the sand began shifting and moving out of the way. Selfie jerked hard against the controls in the cockpit, lifting the Ragnarok out of 4 days' worth of sandstorm burial. In the hangar, as they cleared the ground, Squall called out, "Now, Zell!" The doors opened up as Squall and Rinoa ran down the steps and towards the exit. He could look out from here and see the SR vehicles that had stopped as Quistis kicked up the storm. The man in front wasn't a soldier though. It was a tall man wearing brown and white civilian robes.
Rinoa,
Squall looked at her.
Give him a bath.
She grinned and stretched out her hand. The orb of water flowed out and down. The Estharians cried out and scrambled back into their vehicles as, like a tidal wave, the sphere burst and rushed out over them, sticking them into the now wet sand as the water wave threatened to wash them away. Zell and Rinoa were laughing as the Ragnarok lifted up and out of the storm and began flying. At this moment, it didn't really matter where to.
Sue,
Nita stepped into the office just under the bridge.
Call for you.
Groaning, Shu's head fell back.
I'm beginning to regret these damn radio waves. How can people stand others calling them 24 hours a day? Who is it this time? Says he's the vice president of SR. He has some questions for you about Squall.
Shu's eyes sharpened on him.
Hang up. On a world leader?
Nita asked in surprise.
You know he's potentially a really good client, right? The last place Squall went to was SR. Now he's on the lam. If someone is calling for him, then they want to know where he is. We won't betray our commander like that. Hang up.
Nita nodded and left the room to do as he was told. Sue let out a long breath as she looked over the map table in front of her. She really hoped Squall knew what he was doing. She was going to keep holding things down until he got back, but she really wanted him to hurry it up.
Selfie, what's wrong?
Squall asked as he walked back into the cockpit. Her clothes were in his hands so she could change whenever she got the chance.
Check it out,
she nodded to the display in front of her.
We're running out of fuel. You're kidding,
Squall frowned, coming forward. He saw what she was pointing to and cursed. Of course, he hadn't expected the fuel in the Ragnarok to last forever. Still, he had rather hoped that it would last until they could go into proper hiding. They hadn't even found that damn tracking chip that SR was keeping tabs on them with.
I'd say we have another few hours until we're totally tapped,
Selfie said regretfully.
Alright, which landmass are we closest to? Yeah, see, that's the thing. I sort of just took off without really thinking about it. We're in the middle of the Gelnica Ocean. Selfie!
Squall cried angrily. The Gelnica Ocean was the largest ocean in the world. Being even halfway across it meant that they were as far from any land mass as they could possibly get. And if they ran out of fuel all the way out here... Cursing, Squall ran his hand down his face.
Sorry,
Selfie grimaced.
I think I can make it to the Galbadian continent if I'm careful. Like the very tip of it. I know it's not ideal, but it's the best we can do.
And then they would be stranded on the Galbadian continent. Well, he supposed that leaving the Ragnarok behind would solve their tracking problem.
See what you can do. I'm gonna go let the others know. Yup.
Selfie was focused. She barely blinked when Squall set her clothes on the navigator's seat and walked back to the lift. The others were in the crew launch area, talking and celebrating another escape. Squall's dour face when he walked in alerted them that something was wrong. Everyone had finished getting dressed, but, Aside from Zell, who steam-dried himself, they were all still wet.
Uh-oh,
Quistis raised an eyebrow.
I know that look. What happened? We're almost out of fuel,
Squall said regretfully.
Here.
Rinoa looked out to the window at the infinite ocean around them.
Yeah, here. Selfie thinks we might barely have enough to make it to Galbadia. Which means we're going to have to ditch the ship and walk it the rest of the way. Ah, seriously?
Zell groaned, slumping in his seat.
I hate roughing it. The rest of the way where?
Irvine asked, frowning.
I don't think trying to hide in Galbadia is the best place for us. No.
Squall crossed his arms.
Maybe we can hide out in Windhill. That place is cut off by the mountains and it's so small that no one goes there. We would be able to tell early before any Estharians or Galbadians came sniffing around. Well, it's better than nothing,
Quistis shrugged.
Hey, Squall.
Rinoa looked back at them from by the window.
What's that? What's what?
Squall walked over and joined her. Out on the horizon, coming right towards them, was something metal shining in the water.
Is that a ship?
Quistis asked, squinting.
Looks kind of like an island,
Irvine said, looking out as well.
A metal island?
Rinoa scoffed.
It's probably Battleship Island.
Zell declared, his eyes sparkling.
It's what?
Rinoa asked as Irvine looked at him funny. Quistis groaned as Squall rolled his eyes.
For the last time, Zell,
she looked at him.
Battleship Island sank years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. It certainly doesn't exist above the water. No, no, no. It's totally Battleship Island. Look. There are ships making up the body and everything. Can someone tell me what Battleship Island is?
Rinoa asked, looking between the seats.
Yeah,
Irvine agreed.
It was a research facility,
Quistis explained.
We were too young when it started to remember it, but I've heard about it during classes at Garden. They were trying to develop a draw system,
Zell took over eagerly.
They thought the current one was clunky and annoying. They didn't like that we have to gather and hoard magic like it's a collection. Which, admittedly, kind of sucks, but who really cares?
Squall continued.
I heard that they were trying to find a source of powerful magic deep in Gaia. A magic that doesn't well up often and, when it does, usually does more harm than good. Oh, so is that what it's doing out here?
Rinoa looked back at it.
That's the thing,
Zell leaned forward with a grin.
No one knows what happened to it. It originally traveled all over Gaia gathering magic and materials and then one day, poof. Gone. No one ever heard anything about it. Until, years later, a boat washed up on Galbadian shores. Inside, they found a single scientist from the project who had gone completely mad. He just kept mumbling about a demon they found. Zell, that's just superstition,
Quistis frowned at him.
Even allowing for the fact that a scientist may have washed up on Galbadian shores, he would be mad from dehydration and starvation, not a demon. Furthermore, he wasn't a fighter, he was a scholar. Any monster would seem a demon to him. Either way,
Squall cut them off, looking curiously at the approaching island.
That place was created using magic and machines. There might be fuel cells we can scavenge. Irvine, go tell Selfie that we're landing there. On it.
He turned and ran from the room.
Its walls are pretty high,
Quistis remarked, squinting at it.
Would make it hard for an army to climb up into it, if not impossible. A good place to hide, in other words,
Rinoa translated.
Do you really think we could live on an abandoned research island? Better than the desert,
Squall grumbled, making her laugh. Landing wasn't an easy affair on the metal island. It was crafted from old battleships and machine parts, making it mobile. There was a deck for landing airships, but it was cracked and half broken from years of neglect. They almost couldn't land on it at all. Until Selphie found the ship's arms. The Ragnarok had a dragon head, which Selphie had already figured out was connected to the weapon systems. However, the Ragnarok also had two functional and adept hands that could be controlled by the fourth seat in the cockpit. The radio controller, the navigator, the pilot, and the weapon and arm operator. Of all of them on board, Quistis was the only one who demonstrated a reliable ability to operate the rather complicated arms. Working together with Selphie to maneuver the ship into place, she reached out and used the arms to grab metal anchor points on the island. The ship still ended up on a slight tilt, making it awkward to walk around, but they were secured.
Good work,
Squall praised as Quistis locked the arms in place.
Well, it's not perfect but it will do,
Irvine grinned.
Who wants grilled cactus for dinner? Do we have any other choice?
Rinoa asked.
You can also have burned cactus.
Whistling, Irvine walked away to go back to the kitchen to get to work on cooking up their meal.
We'll start checking the island tomorrow. Let's rest for tonight,
Squall said as Selphie leaned back against her seat in relief. She was still in her mismatched undies.
Good work, Selphie. Now put your clothes on. Aye,
she saluted him lazily before reaching for her dress.
You too, Quistis. You've both worked hard. Zell, you're not allowed to go exploring on your own.
Zell, whose mouth was already opening eagerly, closed as he slumped unhappily. Rinoa laughed at him as she followed Squall back to the lift. They rode down together and started out of the antechamber to the cargo room.
Battleship Island, hey.
Rinoa mumbled.
Wonder what's down there. There has to be a real reason this place was abandoned, you know. Yeah, but we only need fuel cells. At least enough to take us further than Galbadia. You have another plan on where to stay? Well, I like the Windhill idea, but maybe not there. If we can make it to the Trabian region, we can abandon the ship in the mountains, catch some chocobos, and ride them to Shumi village. That place is very well hidden and few people know about it. I did like it there,
Rinoa smiled.
Would you be happy though? Only if you're with me.
Squall's hand reached out and wound through hers. He opened the crew quarters and led her inside. He hadn't meant it as a romantic sentiment. He didn't think about things like that. He just meant it. He would only be happy if she was with him. It was the truth of it that made Rinoa's heart flutter. He turned as the door shut and brought her mouth to his. He liked kissing her. He liked holding her body in his. Even though Squall was on the run from the most powerful country in the world, he was far more content than he could ever remember being. There was just something about Rinoa that soothed the disquiet that had always been in his soul. And it came from the certainty that she was right there beside him. That she would always be right there beside him. He wasn't a child that could only watch as she was snatched away. No matter how far anyone took her, he would always be able to go get her back. From the depths of dark space, to the furthest recesses of her own possessed mind. She pulled him in further, drawing more from him, constantly demanding more than he would normally be comfortable giving. Surrendering to her was easy. He scooped her up into his arms and her legs wrapped around his waist. She latched herself onto him, kissing along his neck as he moved over to the cot. He had to lay the opposite direction from normal to keep with the tilt of the ship, but he didn't much care. Rinoa's kisses drove him out of his mind. It made the world around them fade. The sorrows of his past, the uncertainty of his future. None of it mattered when he was with her like this. Squall, she pushed him back, breathing hard. He overwhelmed her with the ferocity of his emotions sometimes. It was hard to believe when she thought about his calm and unaffected face that he felt so very strongly. Squall was very much a victim of his own emotions. They beat at him, so much more powerful than she would have imagined. His pain, his fear, his joy, his despair. Each one left a deep mark on him. He had been hurt traumatically by his abandonment as a child. He was also touched beyond measure by the honest and passionate feelings she felt for him. She knew that he was surprised at times just how much she cared for him. For someone that had pushed people away for so long, it is crazy for him to think that anyone could feel so much for him.
What is it?
His voice was rough, his arms shaking with the need to drop his body back over hers so he could devour her lips and make her heart race against his.
I want to hear.
She started, touching his face gently.
I want to hear you say that I'm yours.
Squall stared at her, his eyes smoldering. He sat up, disappointing her. She followed him. Her legs remained around his waist as they sat there, hunched slightly under the top bunk. She looked at him with a wide, beautiful gaze in the slight darkness of the room. Squall. She whispered his name in that melodic voice of hers, tingling his nerves.
You're not mine, Rinoa.
She frowned, tilting her head. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers.
I'm yours.
Squall.
I have always been yours. From that first moment you turned to me on the dance floor. A shooting star reaching out for you, like it was showing me the way. You remember all that?
She asked in wonder.
I remember everything about that first moment.
His arms moved about her waist, his thumbs gently stroking her hips.
Sometimes, the middle gets all mixed up, but I never forget the most important moments in my life. The day I lost Sis. The day I was tortured. The day I passed my exam. And, more important than all of them, the day I saw you.
Rinoa had to close her eyes against the tears swimming in them. Squall tilted his head slightly, getting a better look at the way her heart was moving at his words.
You say you started falling for me when I told you to stay with me. I started falling for you the first moment your eyes touched mine. I have always been yours. I will always be yours. Your seed. Your knight. Your man. Because you are my everything, I am yours.
A tear fell down her cheek and Squall gently wiped it away. He knew she wasn't sad, but he rather wished she wouldn't cry at the declaration.
How can I not?
She asked, her voice thick as she opened her eyes back on him. They were sparkling with happiness.
Squall, that's... No one has ever said anything like that to me before. I mean it. I know. That's why I'm crying.
She laughed once, hiccuping as she wiped at her own face.
I believe it, and I believe you. You would never lie to me.
Squall took her wrists in hand and moved them from her face so he could take her lips again. She was still crying gently as she poured her heart into the kiss. Trying to show him beyond words, words that Squall had never trusted anyway, that she would always be his. He was hers. She was his. They belonged to each other. People hated her for powers she never asked for. People hated him for the skills they paid him to use on their enemies. The world could turn against them and it didn't matter so long as they had one another.
Hey.
He moaned into her lips.
Can we move to the Grandiddy forest?
Squall pulled back slightly, his eyes opened on hers.
What? I know it's difficult. People can't usually reach that forest. But I feel like it's the best place for us. Away from everybody that would separate us. The Ragnarok can't land there. The trees are too dense. Yeah, I know. I think the northern part of the forest is rather close to the Trabian continent though. If we could make a boat to cross over and find a way past the cliffs, we could work our way inside.
Rinoa's mouth split into a wide smile.
Yeah. I can't imagine anyone would bother us there.
Squall smiled gently back at her.
You're determined to live out your book, aren't you? No. I'm determined to change the ending. I want that tracker out,
Squall ordered Irvine and Selfie as they opened the bay doors onto the broken landing platform.
I mean it. If we're going to vanish, it needs to go. You got it.
Selfie laughed loudly.
Irvine, you take the engine room. No problem,
he grinned.
And I want the tracker out before you two have sex in the engine room,
Squall told them, tightening his gloves.
I mean that more. How about a brief intermission?
Selfie suggested.
Make the tracker gone,
Squall ordered calmly, his eyes flashing.
Quistis, I know you want to go, but can you stay and watch over them? No problem,
she laughed.
I'll keep them in line. Ah.
Selfie pouted, crossing her arms.
You're no fun. I've been told. Zell, you ready? Ready, baby.
Zell punched eagerly at the air.
I'm so excited. Calm down. Rinoa. Yup,
she smiled at his side, adjusting her blaster.
Let's do this. Good luck,
Quistis waved them off as they walked down the ramp. They had to climb around the ship and up the broken platform. There was a bit of a jump to make it onto the walkway to the entrance. Squall, Zell, and Rinoa stepped onto the rickety wooden path that had been warped and broken from the years out here on the ocean.
Seems like a nice place,
Rinoa grinned.
It's beautiful.
Zell beamed, looking out over it.
Exactly what I dreamed. Think we're going to run into any cool monsters?
Squall didn't respond. He led the way across the rotting wood, being careful where he put his boots so he didn't fall through. The entrance had a metal, submarine-style door that had been left not only wide open but completely off of its hinges. The hinges themselves looked like they had been physically ripped out of place.
Well, that's encouraging,
Rinoa made a face.
Oh, it's so good,
Zell rubbed his hands together. Squall ignored them and stepped inside. He was prepared for it to be dark. He frowned because it was very bright. filled with a glowing, almost pulsing blue light that washed over his body. Rinoa and Zell stepped inside after him, frowning at the large tube it was coming from, and the tree roots that were growing down around it.
"What is that?"
Zell asked eagerly. The sound of his voice triggered the response. The blue light flashed brighter, a series of panels spinning around the tube it was coming from. Zell flinched back, his eyes wide.
"It's moving!" "Ow!"
Rinoa grabbed her head.
"This blue light! It..." "Yeah,"
Squall nodded. The blue light hurt. It was painful against their skin. Not really like it was burning them, though the sensation was close. It was almost like a cross between fire and thunder. Unpleasant and harsh.
"Let's check it out,"
Squall said, stepping forward. He had to grit his teeth as the light flashed brighter, its effects getting stronger.
"The blue light leads all to death. Turn back." "What the hell was that?"
Zell yelled, looking around. That voice. Ringing and powerful. The light faded slightly, giving them a chance to escape. Squall took another determined step forward, going right for the core. The light pulsed again. Rinoa made a small sound of pain as Zell groaned, trying to face it. Squall's jaw clenched and he paused. The light dimmed again. He ran forward. He only got a few steps before the light came back. Squall stopped and let the pain of it wash over him for a moment. It faded once more. Squall ran again.
"You have perceived the resonance,"
the voice said, almost sounding surprised. Squall kept moving, waiting between the painful light and the dimming of the power, before taking his determined steps forward. He jumped over a root, landing in front of a console that was connected to the tube. It was hard to see through the light, but it almost looked like there was something swirling within. A sort of orb?
"What is that?"
Rinoa asked, tilting her head. Squall reached out and brushed away the layer of dust covering the glass. It made the light brighter, but it also made the contents clearer. Squall leaned forward. Orbs. Circling orbs of energy.
"So you wish to challenge me?"
the voice asked angrily.
"It is not our will to fight,"
Squall said calmly. He could feel the light from the core pulsing through him, resonating in his brain. He almost felt like it was reaching out for his spirit.
"Squall."
Rinoa's hand gripped the leather of his jacket. He turned to see, forming from the shadows of the room, a long talon-coated arm. Bright, gleaming red scales. Black eyes. The ruby dragon was growling as it emerged from nothing, beckoned by the light.
"What the hell's with that?"
Zell yelled, shocked.
"Don't use fire,"
Squall said calmly.
"It absorbs fire." "Hey? Then how am I supposed to attack?" "I'll attack."
Squall stepped forward calmly. He reached into his head. Shiva responded readily.
Diamond dust.
A long tunnel of ice. Cold beyond cold. The ruby dragon, breather of fire, wasn't equipped to handle it. Roaring in pain, its body fell over. Dead. Rinoa fell back against the core, breathing hard. The energy within felt her fear.
"Begging me for mercy?"
the voice asked, sounding almost hopeful. Squall turned back calmly.
Never.
The second ruby dragon attacked so quickly that Squall didn't even get a chance to see him. Rinoa screamed in warning but wasn't fast enough to prevent the back attack from slicing down Squall's back, ripping through his jacket and his skin. Blood poured from his body as Squall dropped and rolled, coming back up to face the dragon.
Diamond dust.
The ice goddess ripped through the dragon easily. Squall! Rinoa ran to him. Her hands reached out quickly and the healing energy she wielded sunk into his skin. Squall let out a breath of relief as the power was absorbed into his body, alleviating the pain, repairing the broken skin. Rinoa let out a breath as she rested her head against his back.
You okay? Yeah,
he nodded, turning.
Thanks.
She nodded, smiling at him gently. He looked up over her head and stepped back to the core. It was pulsing angrily. No. Not anger. What was that emotion?
Damned imbeciles!
The voice was trembling now.
Why do you wish to fight?
Not in anger. In fear. Squall knew that emotion well. This thing in there was afraid. Why did he fight? He had just told him that he had no will to fight. So why did he remain here, even knowing that this thing didn't want to fight him either? It only wanted him gone. It would let him leave without a fight. So why did Squall continue forward? He couldn't turn from the challenge. He couldn't run from a fight. Why did he wish to fight? It's in our nature. The light dimmed slightly. The fear faded slightly. Like it was listening. There is no real reason to seek that challenge. That rush. Maybe we were born only to fight. The light was reaching into him, seeking his thoughts, his emotions. Squall and Shiva welcomed it in, beckoned it forward. See what we are.
I see.
It rumbled softly.
Interesting.
Squall blinked. And his eyes opened on a different world. A world surrounded by the spinning blue panels. On either side of him, he heard Rinoa and Zell gasp at the sudden change. The sensation was familiar to Squall. He had felt similarly when he had entered Diablo's lamp. Pulled into a world between worlds that existed to contain a GF. He wasn't at all surprised when he looked up to see the enormous beast descending down upon them. Large, navy blue wings spread out wide as it looked at them through glassy black eyes. Blue and silver scales covered its body like armor. It floated above them, white claws gleaming at the ends of its fingers and toes.
I am Bahamut,
he told them. His voice rumbled in power. In fear.
The great GF. Bahamut.
Squall repeated, surprised. A legendary creature. They said he was the first GF in history. That he had existed for thousands of years. That his breath, his mega flare, could raise an entire city to ashes and dust.
GF.
He repeated, confused at the term.
Did you not know?
Squall asked, stepping towards him.
You're a guardian force. One of the legendary guardian forces. It's said your breath is the most powerful attack possible for a mere human to command. commanding such great power.
Bahamut seemed to shiver.
Yet it is you humans I fear. Why?
Squall frowned, confused. A great creature like him? How could he fear what must be insects to his might? Bahamut was done talking. Drawing back, he dove towards them. The three barely managed to hit the deck in time to avoid the razor-sharp slice of his wide wings. Squall jumped to his feet as the GF pulled up and twisted, snapping his wings out again. Squall pulled his punishment from its sheath and faced him calmly. Rinoa hit the release on her cardinal. Zell lifted his fists, frowning at the mighty dragon overhead.
Do we have a plan here?
Zell asked, a bit worried.
That thing flies way higher than I can hit. Rinoa, bring it down. Dark Messenger.
The force of gravity slammed into the dragon. Roaring out in surprise, he sank lower. Within range of Squall's weapon. He lifted his punishment and let out 3 icy shots. The conflicting affinity burst against him painfully. Roaring, Bahamut drew in a great, glowing breath.
Watch out!
Squall yelled, grabbing Rinoa. He jerked her around, pulling her out of range, putting his back to the dragon. Rinoa grabbed Squall and quickly fed her healing energy back into him. The mega flare blasted against Squall's back. He screamed from the pain of it, but, besides the heat, it did no damage because Rinoa was feeding him her healing powers. Every inch of his skin that got destroyed was quickly fixed again. The flare faded away and, breathing hard, Squall turned. Zell, protected by a wall of fire, was looking with wide, frightened eyes. The flare wasn't fire. It wasn't thunder. It was some strange combination of magics that weren't one thing or another. Non-elemental. A dragon that breathed non-elemental, raw energy that scorched everything it touched to the bone.
Squall.
Zell looked to him. Rinoa looked past him, to the great flying dragon.
I got it,
he assured them. He had started this fight. He couldn't let it end just like that. Especially now that he had Rinoa and her magic that worked so much better than any cure spell.
Blizzara!
Bahamut was fast as he dodged the spell. The magic crashed against the tube surrounding them. It reverberated loudly. Painfully. The three of them cried out and flinched, covering their ears as the sound vibrated in their bones. It only lasted a few seconds, but they were jarring, painful seconds. As the noise died down, Squall's eyes opened to find himself down on his knees. Bahamut was hovering in front of him, his sad black eyes patient. He hadn't attacked even though he all too easily could have won in that moment.
What was that?
Squall asked him, getting painfully to his feet. He felt suddenly sore.
The walls of this cage are protected. Any force that hits them triggers the response.
Zell and Rinoa pushed themselves up as well. Zell was shaking his head, trying to clear the sensation that lingered in his brain. Rinoa was frowning at Bahamut.
You said cage.
He didn't respond to the follow-up question. Now that they were back on their feet, he swooped in for another attack. Squall lifted his gunblade. Bahamut's fangs caught on the sword and jerked Squall up into the air. The two of them flew up together, Squall hanging on by his feet on either side of Bahamut's neck. His large teeth were so close to biting through Squall's punishment. He could see the metal, the best money could buy, bending under the force.
Blizzara!
The explosion of ice into Bahamut's mouth choked him. The dragon reared back and Squall's boots lost their grip on his neck. He started falling down fast towards the ground.
Water!
Rinoa threw out her new magic. The sphere of water appeared a great deal quicker than it had in the dry desert. Squall dived into the top without a splash. His body twisted and dropped out of the bottom. Rinoa jerked her hand up and the water shot up like a laser. Bahamut's armor like scales took the brunt of the damage, but he still cried out when the magic crashed against his chest. His flight pattern thrown off, he started careening towards the ground. Zell was right below him. As he came zooming in, Zell pulled back. His punch landed square against Bahamut's cheek. The dragon flew into the cage walls. Rinoa had only enough to gasp in painful anticipation before his body hit it. The loud, painful sound rang out again and the three of them cried. None so loud as Bahamut, whose roar shook the ground as his body was twisted with the blue electricity powering the cage. It lasted only as long as the sound. He crashed down to the ground, his body smoking, as his fingers twitched. The four of them, breathing hard, gathered their thoughts about the same time. Bahamut pushed himself up, looking Squall in the eye. Squall deliberately stood still as Bahamut launched off into the air once again.
Bahamut, do you know who you are?
Squall asked calmly. Bahamut's black eyes sparkled as he drew in a breath. Zell built another wall of fire. Squall built a wall of ice. Rinoa hid behind Squall, lending her own magic to both men's shield. Mega Flare crashed against them, shattering ice and blowing out the burning fire. But it didn't hit their bodies.
Bahamut, do you know who you are?
Squall asked loudly as the magic faded.
Tell me.
Bahamut dropped and charged like a bullet from the sky. Squall caught him on the edge of the punishment. His knees started buckling, but he held his ground against the enormous dragon's strength. The two of them grappled together for a long second. Squall gritted his teeth as his muscles shook with effort. Bahamut's claws dug into the ground under their feet as he tried to crush Squall.
You are Bahamut.
Squall ground out from between his teeth.
You are the king of dragons. The king of guardian forces.
Bahamut growled as he jerked his head up, then down. Rinoa screamed as Squall was crushed down to the ground. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Squall remained flat on his back as Bahamut lifted his head over him. Black eyes, the size of Squall's head, glittered as Bahamut looked him over. The emotions were powerful, confused, and conflicting.
I am king. Yes.
Squall breathed, his chest heaving.
You are one of the legendary 8. The first GFs that ever existed in the world. The only one whose name survives to this day. People tell legends of your mighty breath. Of your great strength. I have no memories of this. What happened to you here, Bahamut?
Silence. Standing back away from them. Rinoa was straining at Zell's grasp, trying to run to Squall. Her wide eyes looked between him and the massive dragon that was only inches from either crushing, shredding, or disintegrating him. The mighty GF did not answer immediately. He continued to look Squall over as his own private thoughts ran through his head. Trying to figure out what he remembered. Trying to sort out what he would wish to tell.
I have always served humanity,
he growled, his voice soft and distant.
I remember that. Only that. It is the only thing that has accompanied me in this endless torment. Do you know this of me? I only know that the legendary guardians came into the world suddenly. I don't know how you came here or why.
Squall paused as he felt Shiva whispering into his mind.
I came here willingly. I was put here by my own master. The one I served, the one I trusted, placed me into this cage and sealed me inside. He told me he wished only to study my power. My magic. He was curious. Ingenuous. I trusted him. He betrayed you,
Squall guessed easily.
This cage is impenetrable. I have been trapped in here for longer than I can remember. The studies he performed were painful. The tests he conducted were torture. I could not escape. I could not fight back. My mind was stripped from me as punishment for my trust. You've been alone for years. Sealed away from the world in a prison you are partially responsible for creating. As time passed, and I became accustomed to this place, my power began to extend beyond this cage. I could reach out and affect the world. I killed some of the humans who tortured me.
Squall said nothing. He could feel Bahamut waiting for Squall to cast judgment on him for the murders of other humans. But Squall felt nothing for those men. They had betrayed their responsibility to the GF that served them. He would deserve the same if he tried anything similar with Shiva.
They tried to control me. They tried to force me back in. I fought back. Is this my nature? It's the nature of any creature to want to survive.
Bahamut looked at him. His black eyes shined in the blue light of the cage.
Are you the one who made everyone abandon the island? It was not I. They left me here because they could no longer control me. But this cage is powerful. My power extends only to calling on my brethren. Is this the king power you say I possess? Bahamut, I do not blame you for what you did. You weren't wrong for doing it. I would do the same. So you say. You can't know how you would behave in such a situation unless you were in it. I have been.
Squall's words caused the dragon to back off slightly.
I was tortured by one that I believed that I trusted. At least, trusted not to torture me. When I broke free, I killed my way out of that place. And I would do it again if I had to. You are very calm. Did you kill your torturer? I did not. I've come to understand what he is. What he's become. I can't forgive him, nor can I punish him for what he didn't really choose to do.
Slowly, Squall lifted his arm. Bahamut's nose began smoking gently as Squall placed his gloved hand on his muzzle. Reaching out and touching him gently for the first time in too long. Bahamut had been alone for a long time. Probably as long as Squall had. He felt connected to this GF. Almost like he was a kindred spirit.
Come with us, Bahamut. Join us. You wish to subject me to human cruelty again. I wish for you to join your brothers in our ranks. You are not the first GF we hold. There are many of you among us. I know it's not easy, but trust in humans once more. Let us bring you from this darkness and out into the world again.
Bahamut growled gently. It didn't sound threatening nor encouraging.
This cage is impenetrable. There is no escape for either of us. It would be kinder for me to kill you now so you are not trapped here forever with me. If we can break this cage, will you join us?
Bahamut rumbled again, standing up and backing off. Squall sat up. Almost immediately, Rinoa pushed Zell off of her and ran to his side. She slid down onto her knees, putting her hands around him as she let out a breath of relief that she was all right.
Free me, human! If you can!
Rinoa, Squall turned to her.
Wami!
She pointed to herself, surprised.
This place was designed to hold a GF, not a sorceress. I know it can't hold you. Break it open.
Rinoa nodded. She looked up and around herself. Worried. The walls let out that horrid sound whenever something hit them. The ground though. Bahamut watched as Rinoa looked down. Thoughtfully, she placed her hand down onto the glowing floor. She released Squall and flattened both palms down. Taking a deep breath, she called upon the power of thunder. Destroy the machine that kept them in here. Her fingers sparked and the light around them flickered. Her hair began standing on end as the light of the ground began brightened. Bahamut's eyes widened as Zell took a few cautious steps back. Squall didn't move. His skin tingled in the face of her power, but it didn't hurt. Distantly, they heard something that sounded like an explosion. Then a low rumbling. The cage around them started shaking. The panels circling around them flickered out one at a time. Bahamut's long neck turned around as the world darkened around him for the first time in a long time. Relief flooded his veins. Rinoa let out a cry of effort. The ground shattered under her hands. They all fell into the darkness. Squall drew in a quick breath as he felt something unfamiliar in his head.
Have you seen the light? Ah! He's waking up!
Squall! Rinoa's voice, filled with worry, had his gently returning consciousness snapping back to reality. It was abrupt, but he didn't like to hear that tone. His eyes opened quickly and the first thing he saw was Rinoa's relieved face leaning over him. Squall! Throwing herself onto his chest, Rinoa clung on as Squall pushed himself up. He automatically reached out to hold her as he looked around. Zell and Rinoa had taken him back to the ship. He was laying out on the ground of the Ragnarok, the others standing around him, relief on their faces.
What happened?
Squall asked calmly.
Rinoa kind of broke the lab,
Zell said, holding back a laugh.
You totally blacked out. Are you two okay?
Squall asked quickly, looking at Rinoa. She nodded, her head still against his chest as she refused to let him go. He let out a breath of relief.
What about Bahamut? Did you pick him up?
She shook her head. Squall looked to Zell and he did the same, grinning. Frowning, Squall turned his own thoughts inward. There was no way. Absolutely no way. Do you need something? Bahamut asked calmly.
What they?
Squall nearly jumped in surprise.
Shiva.
Yes? He had both of them? At the same time? His head didn't hurt and Shiva wasn't screaming in anger. He felt absolutely fine. Better than fine. Shiva was laughing at him gently. Bahamut was growling low, like a purr. Both of them were in his head. More than that, they were at the same spot in the back of his head. Like they were not only willing to share, but quite happy to be close to each other while doing it.
Bahamut jumped in you before either of us could welcome him in,
Zell explained, smiling.
Seems he knows what he wants. But... Shiva. Is she okay?
Quistis asked, leaning down.
I can't believe she'd be willing to share with him. Me either.
She hated Ifrit so much that it had been beyond painful to hold both of them at once. Yet Bahamut, who held every power that sat opposite of hers, who controlled all the magic she didn't, she was just fine with. Why? Squall asked. Why Bahamut of all the GF? It would have made more sense for her to welcome Leviathan over Bahamut. At least their affinity was the same element. It isn't about the affinities, she told him calmly. Do you remember the first time we met? You were a first-year upperclassman. I had been in circulation for years. Since Sue had found me in a monster she defeated on assignment and turned me in when she couldn't control my power. You had already rejected 3 of the trainer GF assigned to you. You had proven you knew how to junction, but you refused to do it. Do you remember why? You were smaller then. Cuter. I was pressed into you against your will. You were angry at me for daring to enter you. You actually snapped at me. I had joined with many seeds by that point. They were trying desperately to find someone to hold on to me. I rejected everyone though. All anyone ever wanted from me, needed from me, was my power. Who I was, what I did, was unimportant. The only thing that mattered was my great strength. I was given to you on a lark in the first place. I was deemed too powerful for a cadet's trainer GF, but the faculty decided to throw the GF who rejected all seeds to the cadet who rejected all GFs. I think they just wanted to see what would happen and find amusement in it. But I felt in you what I had felt in no other before you. You didn't want my power. You didn't care what strength I brought to you. In fact, you were rather angry at being forced to hold me. You resented the fact that a GF could only be useful by invading your head space. A space you considered sacred. You actively pushed people away, you didn't want to share your most intimate thoughts with any another person, not even a GF. You were a hurt little boy. Scared of everyone around you. You didn't want me, but you needed me more than anyone. I wasn't attracted to you because you can control my power. I accepted you because you needed someone to care for you. Squall barely remembered what she was talking about. It almost felt like Shiva had been in his head his entire life. She had always been nurturing and loving though. Accepting him when she would tolerate no one else. Then holding on tight to his brain. Refusing to let another in because she knew that he wasn't ready to let another in that close. Exactly. Except for Ifrit. I just dislike him. Squall chuckled gently. Yeah, he got that. Bahamut may hold power over all of the elements I do not, but he is exactly like you. Alone. Hurt. Scared. He needs me, needs us. Not for what we can give him, but because he needs someone to be there for him. So of course I welcomed him in. Besides, Bahamut and I have been together since the beginning. I would never turn him away. Squall frowned.
What are you talking about?
Bahamut lost his memories, but I have not. I remember our past, and I'll be happy to share who we are and what we came from with him. You know me? You know what I am? Of course, my brother. We were created at the same time. You and I are legend.
What? Shiva?
Oh, calm down. You never asked where I came from. I would have told you if you had.
Squall.
His eyes focused again to see Rinoa frowning at him. She knew he was talking to Shiva, but she couldn't hear what was being said. Her heart was connected to him, not his GF.
Shiva just likes to play her games.
Squall shook his head. He could hear her laughing at him.
Well, congratulations,
Quistis beamed.
I never thought I'd see the day when you finally got a second GF. This is worthy of celebration. Welcome to the family, Bahamut.
Selfie yelled happily.
Leviathan says he's happy to see you again. Siren and Carbuncle hope you feel better soon. Pandemona and Cerberus welcome you warmly, and Quetzalcoatl is singing a song for you.
Quistis smiled at Squall.
Minotaur and Sacred want to wrestle.
Irvine tipped his hat to him.
And Cachuar and Tonberry promise that we're not so bad. Thanks for that ringing endorsement, guys. Ifrit is annoyed that you still get along with the Ice Lady.
Zell frowned. Then shrugged.
But Alexander welcomes you and Doom Train. Well, he's grunting very nicely. Diablos promises that Squall is a nice guy and a formidable warrior.
Rinoa smiled, leaning against Squall and hugging him tight, hugging Bahamut tight.
Thanks for giving us a chance, Bahamut. We'll never betray your trust.
Squall smiled as he returned Rinoa's embrace for a moment. Then he stood up and grinned around at all of his friends. All of them happy to welcome Bahamut to their group. He could feel the Dragon King warming to the attention. Master? You can just call me Squall, Bahamut. I hate it when people give me titles. There is another.
What?
Squall frowned, his eyes focusing inward again. There is another trapped within.
Who?
I don't know. I never saw her myself. The humans spoke of a weapon they found in Central when they brought her aboard. She was taken under. I hear her scream sometimes.
What is it, Squall?
Rinoa asked, frowning at his face.
Bahamut says there's another GF in the research facility. Buried deep under. Seriously?
Selfie frowned.
How many GF did these people have? Probably just the two.
Squall crossed his arms.
It was hard enough keeping Bahamut under control. A second one, even if it was only half the power of him, would be that much more difficult. He says he hears her crying out every now and then. He doesn't know what they did to her, but whatever it was, it's still affecting her even now. He last heard her scream a few days ago. What horrible people!
Quistis covered her mouth, turning away.
How could they? What time is it?
Squall asked, looking around. He couldn't see the sky, so he didn't know how long he had been unconscious.
It's about noon,
Irvine said.
We just finished running through the program checks on the ship. We can't find anything that looks to be the tracking program, so it has to be something in the engine. We were about to get started on that when Zal dragged you in here. We probably have enough time to get down there,
Squall said, frowning.
We need to free that second GF, if only to get her out of here. Great, Selfie, and I will get back to work.
Irvine smiled.
Squall.
Quistis made a face.
What? Well, I just saw them before you guys came in. I hadn't even gotten around to telling Selfie and Irvine yet.
Squall sighed.
Esthar again. Esthar again,
She nodded.
They were on the horizon the last time I saw them. I don't think there's any place they can climb up, but they've still found us.
Squall nodded.
Okay. Quistis, can you help Irvine in the engine? Well, I'm not very good with machines, but I can try. Why though? Selfie.
The tiny girl tilted her head curiously.
I need you, Siren, and Leviathan to keep the Estharians at bay. Like a tidal wave.
She bounced eagerly on her heels. No, Squall's voice was dull and final and she slumped, disappointed.
We don't want to kill them. We don't need to drown an entire army to prove our point. We just need the tracking chip gone. What I need from you is to use the waves to keep them off if they try to climb. Or to push them back if they try to shoot us from afar.
Selfie nodded.
All right. But it would be so easy to just... No.
Squall snapped. Selfie slumped again.
Zell, Rinoa, we're going back. Selfie, defense only. You're no fun.
She crossed her arms unhappily.
Captain. What is it?
The leader of the fleet turned at the helmsman's call.
There's a girl standing on top of the Ragnarok.
Grabbing his binoculars, the captain looked through. It took him a moment to find the girl. She was wearing bright yellow, but she was tiny. Jumping up and down, she was waving at them with a wide smile on her face.
That kind of makes me nervous,
the captain grimaced, lowering the binoculars.
Sir.
One of the soldiers ran in, saluting him formally.
We have new orders from the Vice President.
When Rinoa had broken Bahamut free from his cage, she had accidentally wiped out the entire first floor of the research center. All of the electrical components had been broken apart and turned to little more than dust. There was now a large hole in the ceiling through which the tree roots that had previously wrapped around the blue tube in the room were now hanging through. Looking around at the crumbling room, Squall was impressed.
Nice work, Rinoa.
She was blushing, embarrassed.
I didn't mean to take it this far. It was effective. That's all that matters.
Squall leaned over the large hole in the floor, looking around at the large, circular metal room below.
All right. Let's go.
Using the tree roots, Squall climbed down through the hole. Zell and Rinoa followed after him quickly. Squall jumped down the last few feet and looked around. The circular room was covered around the entire perimeter with windows. He could see the base of the rest of the island above the ceiling, just under the surface of the water. A little further than that, he could see the round bottom hulls of the Estharian ships. Gasping with pleasure, Rinoa ran to the window. She put her hands against the cool glass out and let out an impressed breath as she looked around. She could see so far under the water from here. And everything looked so different from below the surface.
What's with this place?
Zell asked, frowning as he walked around. Squall went the opposite direction, moving towards the central structure around which the entire floor had been constructed. Steam was billowing out of some of the pipes that had been cracked by the floor falling down around them. There was a terminal there. Covered in dust and debris, Squall had to spend a minute clearing it all away to reach the terminal. The screen was manually operated, there was no touch screen. Squall pressed a few things experimentally before he chanced upon the power button. With a low-pitched groaning and hiss, the machine came to life. Zell came up from behind him, frowning as a distorted voice spoke from the machine. Warped from years of disuse, it changed pitch and volume randomly as it spoke to him.
Low energy mode. Reserve steam pressure, 20 units. Calculating. It is possible to reach the excavation site on reserve steam pressure. Excavation site.
Zell repeated, confused. At the window, Rinoa leaned up on her toes as she looked down, trying to get a better glimpse of the dark thing she could see at the bottom of the ocean. Kind of circular.
Display status report.
The machine asked. Squall clicked the button to continue after a moment's search.
Generating status report. Complete. Tower level 0, damaged but responsive. Tower level 1 to 10, fully operational. Excavation site, fully operational. Warning, due to low energy levels it is difficult to access a path to the lower levels. Tower units must be rotated on specific routes to reach the bottom. Cool. What's the route?
Zell asked, but the machine didn't respond to him.
Warning, facility is running on reserve steam pressure. Descent is not recommended. Level 1 door can be accessed with 4 steam units. Expend units.
Squall pressed the continue button again.
Expending 4 units. Warning, 16 steam units remaining. Opening the door to level 1.
Zell cried out as the center tower began spinning. Underneath their feet, Squall could hear and feel the ground rumbling. The steam that had been leaking out in small amounts started gushing into the room, raising the temperature and obscuring his vision slightly. It took about 10 seconds. The tower let out a warning alarm. Squall turned when he saw something orange flashing against the wall. The light was originating from a hatch in the floor with yellow and black bands marking the door. The alarm rang out warningly for a moment, then cut off as the hatch, then the second one beneath that, opened up. The staircase leading below was revealed as the steam in the room eased.
So that place is creepy.
Zell frowned as Rinoa returned from the window. She stood at Squall's side, staring down into the darker circular room below.
Shall we?
She asked happily. Squall nodded and led the way down. Level 1 was in much better condition than Level 0. Spared from the ravages from above, the entire area was only dirted by a layer of dust. The machine parts were still mostly shining, the windows remained bright and clear. From this depth, Rinoa could see dolphins playing in the currents and she gasped in delight at the sight of them. Squall moved immediately to the next terminal. This one woke easier under his touch.
Steam units required to reach level 2. Warning, 16 steam units remaining. Expend units.
Squall continued again.
Opening the door to level 2.
The spinning of the rooms was softer this time, though the alarm that blared before the floor hatch opened was the same volume. Once again, the room filled with steam as the doors opened. It remained in place this time after the door had opened, billowing out into the room as Squall moved towards the stairs to the next level. Rinoa was disappointed to leave the dolphins behind, but she followed after Squall eagerly enough. Level 2 was considerably darker than the first 2 floors. The low lights had mostly burned out at this level and they were so deep under the water now that the sea was getting darker around them. The fish at this level weren't so pretty as the ones higher up. From here though, Rinoa got a much better view of the thing below them. It was definitely round. And big. Bigger than the island itself. As Squall was expending one more steam unit to access the next level, Rinoa was trying to see down to the large thing below them. The room shook a little precariously when the tower twisted this time. Rinoa turned back as rust and dirt fell down from the ceiling. Steam filled the room as the hatch opened again, the light of the alarm casting an eerie orange glow over everything.
That computer said 10 floors, right?
Zell asked, looking down.
Yeah, so this should be level 3.
Rinoa joined him.
I see a 6 on the wall.
Zell frowned at the area beside the staircase. They weren't traveling down level by level. They were traveling in increments. Squall didn't immediately walk to the now open hatch. Instead, a second terminal in the room caught his eye and, curious, he made his way over. Rinoa looked over her shoulder as Squall brought that computer to life.
Steam room, locked. Administrative override.
Squall shrugged and pressed the continue button.
Verifying. Confirmed. Steam room, unlocked. Units required to open the steam room, 4 units. Warning, 13 steam units remaining. Continue. Are you sure?
Zell frowned.
We only have so many units.
Rinoa pondered the door on the central tower.
Well, we haven't been using very many, I think we can afford it. Besides, it's called the steam room. Might be useful.
Squall nodded and clicked continue.
Opening door to the steam room.
The tower didn't twist this time. Steam billowed out from beyond the door and, after a long series of groans, the door slid open. Squall stood and walked through. The steam room was connected to all the various levels of the tower through a great many pipes that all connected to a central source here in the tower. The water reservoir was steaming through the rusty cracks in the cistern. There was another terminal here. As Zell went to investigate the cistern, Squall and Rinoa walked to the terminal. This one was rusted worse than the others. It took Squall mashing against the buttons, beating against it a few times, to bring it to life. Even then, the light was weirdly dim and the voice from within as warped as the one on level 0.
Warning, steam machine in disrepair. Unable to create more steam. Warning, water reservoir in disrepair. Unable to obtain more water. Warning, low power levels. Unable to restore power level. That's cheerful,
Rinoa frowned.
Hey, Squall,
Zell pointed into the window of the cistern.
I think I see the water it's talking about. I think it connects up there.
Squall thought for a moment.
All right. Zell, see if you can heat the water. Make more steam. Awesome.
Laughing, Zell put his hands against the metal tank. Pushing the heat of Ifrit's fire into the metal walls, into the cistern and water, he began cooking the water below. The disconnect between himself and the water itself made it take longer, but after a few moments, steam began gushing from all the pipes in the room. Rinoa looked over to Squall as the temperature of the room rose. He was looking down at the panel, watching the steam levels on the readout rise with it.
Squall. Aren't you hot?
Squall blinked and looked over to her.
No. Not at all. Why?
Rinoa looked around.
Well, I'm hot. It's like a sauna in here. And usually when it's hot Shiva practically has ice crystals in your hair. But you're not doing it now.
Squall frowned and looked down at himself. Honestly, he hadn't been paying attention. He hadn't felt at all hot, so he hadn't thought about it. Now that he realized that he didn't feel cold either. Shiva wasn't complaining loudly about the heat. I don't feel heat, Bahamut told him simply. He was the king of dragons. His breath carried, partially, the power of flame. So Squall wasn't affected by it anymore. And because he wasn't affected, neither was Shiva. Their powers were working together to make Squall immune to both effects. Rinoa smiled at his realization.
That's amazing. So you're immune to hot and cold now? I guess so,
Squall shrugged.
Could be useful.
Rinoa grinned.
Hey, Squall,
Zell frowned, looking over at them.
I think that's it. I'm not seeing any more water in the tank. Did that do it?
Squall looked back at the terminal and nodded.
We got 7 new units out of that. We're up to 16. Not bad.
Laughing, Zell ran from the room again. Rinoa and Squall followed after him and down the stairs to keep on going to level 6. It only took 1 steam unit from there to make it down to level 9. Then another unit to open level 10 below that. Rinoa could look out the windows on level 9 and see the deep-sea fish swimming outside of the windows. They were a rather eerie sight, covered in darkness. She couldn't even see the surface from here anymore. It wasn't a staircase that took them from level 9 to 10. Instead, a lift was waiting for them there and carried there quite a distance down through the remaining tower. At the bottom, there were no more windows, nor was the central tower structure in place. Instead, the entire floor was taken up by a steam machine. This one connected to a very large, thick metal door that was the only other thing in this room. Zell walked over to the machine as Squall investigated the door.
This place is kind of creepy,
Rinoa said, frowning around at the large room. It was filled with echoes that were somehow hollow and disturbing.
Squall,
Zell looked over to him.
This thing says we need 4 steam units to open the door. But I think I can mess around with the machine a bit and open it myself. Can I? No,
Squall frowned at him.
Just expend the units. We have plenty to spare. Are you sure? It would just take a minute. No,
Squall repeated. He did not want Zell messing with that. Knowing him, he would probably just end up hitting it. Pouting, Zell used the terminal to expend the units.
Opening the door to the ocean deposit.
Squall turned back and watched the billowing steam open the large metal door. Then the one behind that. Then the one behind that one.
Seems a tad excessive,
Rinoa frowned.
Let's just go.
Squall moved forward determinedly. He just wanted to get this trapped GF and leave this place already. The large doors led to a metal walkway that extended across a long fall. Rinoa gasped as Zell cried out in amazement as they started across. Squall was looking around, surprised. He wasn't sure what he had expected to find. It wasn't an entire, abandoned city. The entire area had been enclosed in by a glass and metal dome that was keeping the water away from the excavation site. It was pitch black out there because of how far underwater they were. The light being cast over the area was coming from the bottom of the metal tower and some strange, blue lamp-like things set in intervals around the stone city. It looked old. Ancient really. Most of the buildings were crumbling to pieces. Which made the blue lamps, which were obviously part of the city itself, rather more eerie. What was powering them that they were continuing to burn after so long underwater?
What is this?
Rinoa whispered, leaning out over the metal walkway. Squall didn't have an answer for her. All Bahamut knew was that Battleship Island had come to a rest here when the city was found. But Bahamut was already in isolation then. He had never seen the city and only heard about it when the researchers would speak of it around him. Which was rare, since he was usually their topic of conversation when around him. However,
Bahamut says that, when this place was abandoned, he heard them yelling to seal it off. To seal something down here. The GF?
Zell asked as they stepped from the metal walkway and onto the stone platform that was part of the city itself.
No.
Squall frowned.
Bahamut says that the weapon was here before they discovered the city. He thinks they were experimenting on it as well as him. Until the day they sealed the excavation site. He says they pulled the GF down here when they did.
Humming thoughtfully, Rinoa was leaning out a little far over the edge. Squall reached out and took her arm, worried she was about to fall. She turned and gave him a small smile of gratitude before pointing over the edge.
There's something down there. Yeah, the GF,
Zell grinned.
Yeah, but I can hear her,
Rinoa pressed. Like a whispering in her head. No, that was too substantial. It was softer. Like the whisper of a feather dusting across her brain. If she hadn't been actively searching, had the area around them not been so quiet, she might not have noticed.
Then let's get down there,
Squall said simply.
We'll pull her out and get out ourselves. We still need to find those fuel cells, don't forget. That was the only reason we stopped.
The others fell in line behind him as he started down the tall building the metal tower attached to. He went slowly at first, worried that maybe the path would crumble under his weight. Not only did the stone remain firm and sturdy, but he didn't even hear or see a hint that their body weights were doing any sort of damage to the ancient structures. Eventually, they just started running flat out. Circling around a series of steps and platforms all lit with the dim blue lights. Deeper and deeper they climbed into the ocean city. Then further on. Following the gentle call that Rinoa heard in her head. They paused only once at the base of a statue of, what appeared to be, a god.
Does it have an inscription?
Zell asked as they admired it for a moment. Rinoa, who had come in closer, frowned.
Yeah, but it's not a language I recognize. Squall.
He shook his head.
Kind of reminds me of ancient Centran.
Rinoa sighed and stood up. She rather wished that no one had abandoned this place. There were so many questions about this place and, since the researchers had left it behind, she knew that she would never figure it out.
Come on,
Squall jerked his head to the side.
Let's just get this over with.
Rinoa nodded and they kept going. Down more stairs, more platforms. Squall was beginning to wonder what this place could possibly have been. What was the point of having so many platforms and stairs like this? The final staircase didn't end at a stone platform like the others. Instead, it came to rest in a sort of grotto with a small trickle of water falling down into the deep pond from far above. Squall couldn't see from where. However, he could see that they were almost directly beneath the metal tower. At least, the light from the tower was immediately above their heads. And, coming from the tower, was a long cable. It hung, taut and firm, like a bow pulled tight. Squall stepped in closer, but he couldn't see into the water. What he did see was what looked like the other end of the cable trailing into the water, then out again connecting to a large machine. The screen was still bright, flashing dangerously red. Squall approached, frowning.
What's it say?
Zell asked, trying to look over his shoulder. Squall brushed away the dust from the screen. He didn't really need to though, because the white words on the red screen were painfully easy to read. Lockdown in progress. All staff evacuate immediately.
Well, that's encouraging,
Rinoa frowned, leaning against Squall's arm.
So, where's the GF?
Zell asked. Rinoa frowned, listening again. It was easier to hear the GF from here, but it was still like trying to locate a sound with only one ear. After a moment, she pointed towards the pool.
It's down there. But I don't think it's alone. I kind of feel something.
She looked at Squall uncertainly, unsure if it was just the eeriness of her surroundings. He nodded.
Yeah. I can feel it too. There's something there. Something the scientists sealed with a GF because they couldn't capture it safely. So, are we pulling it up?
Zell asked, looking at the cable.
We can only get the GF if we can get the monster.
Squall rotated his shoulders as he spoke, preparing for a fight. Quistis wasn't wrong. For those who couldn't fight, even the weakest Grat seemed like a beast. While he didn't think whatever this monster was would be that weak, he was still allowing for the inexperience of normal men in dealing with monsters. Squall reached out and hit the override command on the screen. The voice that came from the computer was still clear and powerful despite its long time down here.
Warning, 10 steam pressure units remaining. Emergency backup generator initializing. Process complete. Use 10 remaining steam pressure units with backup fuel cells to continue excavation.
Squall clicked continue. What were they trying to excavate anyway?
Proceeding with excavation.
Rinoa frowned, stepping back from the terminal.
I kind of have a bad feeling about this.
Squall was inclined to agree. Too late to back out now. The cable machine began whirring again, pulling on the remaining cable in the pond. It was protesting from so long in stillness, but it still performed its job without issue. Squall lifted his head to the cable that was entering into the center of the pond from the tower. He expected it to be being pulled down since one end was in this machine here. He frowned, squinting. No. That cable was being pulled up as well. Both cables were pulling up. Pulling something that was buried at the bottom of the pond. They stopped, twanging tightly against something below. Squall took a quick step back as the water started bubbling. A second later, a blaring alarm began screeching through the air of the entire dome as the tower light flashed red in warning.
Lockdown terminated. Excavation proceeding. Warning, high energy reading detected. Warning, high energy reading detected. All staff must evacuate immediately. All staff must evacuate immediately.
Squall. Zell frowned. The surface of the pond was frothing violently now. Something crashed from above. All three of them jumped back as the cable that had been pulling up just a moment ago began racing back towards the water. Too fast. Not like it was being fed. More like it was being pulled. The red light kept blaring. But the blue crystals that were built into the city began pulsing. Resonating together. Getting brighter until the red light was absorbed into their glow. Squall could hear them beginning to ring. The voice warning of incoming high energy levels was almost lost under the delightful sound of the crystalline song. It was beautiful. And terrifying. The air started getting heavy. The pressure in the dome pressing down on them. The cable kept being jerked into the pond. Slowly, he drew his punishment from its sheath. He heard Rinoa and Zell quickly follow suit behind him. Then the cable stopped. The tightness gone, the tension completely reduced. It dangled loosely into the pond. Even the one pulling into the machine before him had stopped. The bubbling of the water calmed and he and the others shared a look. Slowly, Squall stepped forward. His boots were strangely loud against the rocky ground even under the alarm and the crystal ring. The pond water was still dark. No. It was shadowed. From below. Crash. Squall cried out as he was thrown backward from the punch. Rinoa screamed, throwing out her magic blindly to catch him. He sank into another water sphere, the cooling effects of it washing over his body before he could hit a hard stone wall. Rinoa lowered him gently and he dropped from the bottom, completely dry. He looked up, his ribs sore, at the large, purple and silver hoof that had erupted from the water and punched him like he was a sack of rice. Slam! A second hoof landed beside it. The body that it pulled up after it was large, muscular, and built like a tank. Its torso was small in comparison, but the long, golden, translucent sword that it carried in its fist was big enough to make up for it. An ugly, angry head with razor-sharp, gleaming silver teeth, glared at them hungrily.
And first up. It's Zell, baby.
Laughing, he charged in. Fists blazing, he jumped past the swing of the golden sword. He landed on the chest of the monster, grabbing it behind its neck. He used it to anchor himself as he began pummeling the thing's face. The burning streaks his fire left behind singed the thick skin. But the monster made no growl of pain. Reaching out with its free hand, it took hold of Zell by the back of his shirt. Rearing back its entire tank-like body, it lifted Zell one-handed over its head. Then dropped down, throwing him clear over the grotto.
Zell!
Rinoa yelled, reaching out for him. She couldn't grab him with a water sphere because she couldn't see where he was landing.
Rinoa! Drop!
Squall yelled suddenly. She didn't think. Her body hit the ground. She wasn't even fully down when she felt the swishing of air that was the monster's sword slicing where her neck had been.
Roll!
Rinoa pushed away, spinning out of reach and barely avoiding the monster's hooves crashing down against her head and spine and crushing her to dust. Rinoa jumped up and ran away from the creature. Breathing hard, she stopped and turned across from the grotto, completely opposite from Squall. The monster was looking between them, trying to decide who looked most delicious. It had been trapped down there for a very long time. It was so very hungry. Before it could decide, Squall acted. Throwing out his hand, his eyes flashing icy blue, he called forth Shiva's power.
Diamond dust!
The icy tunnel froze the monster. The shattered shards couldn't rip through its thick skin. Shaking off the effect of the cold, the monster decided Rinoa would be an easier target. And she was closer to the stairs. He could catch her, cut off Squall's exit, then catch him. Rinoa stiffened when the monster turned to her. A hungry grin spread across its angry, angular face. It turned slowly and Rinoa's gaze darted around quickly looking for a way out. She barely had time to decide. The monster was far faster than anything its size deserved to be. It charged her down, swinging back its large sword. Rinoa cried out and jumped away. Rolling and coming up, she ran towards it. Under its body. It turned as she was sprinting out from between its legs, running for Squall. She stopped and turned just behind him. The monster was standing between them and the exit, grinning as it anticipated crunching down on their bones, sucking out the marrow, and letting their hot, creamy blood slide down its parched throat. Squall's hand tightened on his sword. He was scanning the monster's body, looking for any sort of weak spot in the armor. Damn! He couldn't see one. The whole monster, even the underbelly and tender joints, were all covered in the same hard substance as the rest of it.
Squall,
Rinoa said, worried, looking at the beast. All right, if Squall could get in close, he might be able to pierce its heart. Assuming its heart was even in its torso and not in the tank body. Letting out a ground-shaking, ear-splitting roar, the monster reared back. Then crashed back down onto its hooves. It charged. Squall let out 3 quick shots that the monster dodged easily. It was going to run right over them and, with their backs to the grotto wall, they were stuck.
Holy judgment!
The monster skidded to a halt as, from the far edge of the dome, a rain of holy lights fell down upon the monster. The purifying light burned it from the inside as Squall and Rinoa took that moment to escape from the corner they had been pushed into. Squall jumped out onto the grotto pond. His boots touched down against the surface and, immediately, ice spread out under his steps. He stopped and turned, the pond freezing over completely because of Shiva's touch. Rinoa ran around the monster, aiming for the stairs. She wasn't trying to escape, she was thinking only of higher ground. She ran halfway up the lowest flight of stairs before turning, aiming her cardinal at the monster as the gentle holy light faded away. More irritated than hurt, the monster turned towards the origination of the lights. Zell, who had climbed over the buildings back their way, was grinning from the top of the grotto. Lifting one burning fist, he slammed it down against the ground. Rocks began falling but, more importantly, the force of it launched Zell over Squall's frozen pond. He landed with a blast of fire and smoke on the monster's back. The burn and surprise caused it to rear up. Zell, grabbing onto the beast's shoulder, didn't fall. His feet kicked back and, as the monster came back down, Zell dropped them both forward into its spine. The monster cried out. It reached back, grabbed Zell by the neck. It threw him overhead. Zell twisted so he landed on his feet. Grinning, his eyes sparking, Zell faced it head-on.
Come on, ugly! You ain't got nothin'!
The monster reared back to slam his hooves into him. Zell pulled back his blazing fist. They struck at the same moment. Crying out, Zell flew backwards and crashed against a stone wall of a nearby building. The stone cracked and splintered and his body collapsed over. The monster, reeling from the blow, stumbled on its back feet. It hit the edge of the pond. The ice was thick enough for Squall's weight, not enough for the monster's. The pond shattered and the monster fell back into it. Thrashing against the water, it started pulling itself back up again. From above, Rinoa threw out her magic. The ice started crystallizing around him, trapping its body into the pond. With brute strength, he kept breaking through the ice. Even as the crystals were breaking off, its thrashing was splashing its body with more water that Rinoa was able to freeze to create more of a trap around it. Squall, quite comfortable on the slippery surface, ran up the ice, up the monster's flank. Crying out, he buried his punishment into the monster's back. Blood, deep blue and bubbling, dripped onto Squall's hands and down the monster's chest. The monster's body locked up, twitching. The torso tipped over. Gritting his teeth, Squall jerked the gun blade from the monster's body. Stepping backward, breathing quickly, the monster went motionless.
Nice one, Squall.
Zell gave him a thumbs up. Rinoa frowned. Then screamed.
Squall, run!
The monster's torso jerked, the golden blade swung out. Squall didn't get a chance to move. Rinoa threw out her magic, jerking up a spear of ice. The sword broke through them, tilting awkwardly as it did so. Because it did, the blade didn't hit Squall directly. The blunt force still struck him painfully and Squall was thrown backwards. Rinoa, focused on the ice, couldn't catch him with water this time. Squall struck the ground with a bone-jarring thud. His gun blade slipped from his fingers and hit the ground beside him. The monster got back to its hooves. Its small torso was slumped over, but the large body was still moving. A second face, grinning and mad, opened its eyes and mouth on the front of the body. It tossed the dead monster on its head around like a weapon itself. Squall started pushing himself up. Then cried out in sudden agony. Doubling over, he looked with horror at his hands. The blue blood that he had drawn from the monster was bubbling. No, it was his skin bubbling under the blood. Melting. Quickly, Squall started wiping his hands off on the ground. The blue blood, his red blood, and the bruised flesh of his hands smeared on the rock. Squall screamed, jerking back as his hands trembled. Rinoa dropped down beside him. Gasping, crying out, she grabbed his wrists. Squall tried to yell at her to release him. To not touch the blood. It hurt too much. He couldn't draw in the breath. Rinoa grabbed his bloody, mangled hands. She had to resist the urge to throw up at the feeling of his bones on her palm. She closed her eyes, fighting past the sensation. She forced her magic into his hands, tears rushing down her face. His pain became her pain. She screamed and Squall cried out as the burning around his hands felt like it was getting worse. How did he still have nerve endings to feel with? Behind them, Zell was fighting against the face torso. Trying to avoid the blood that was being splattered around by the carelessly laughing monster. It burned through whatever it touched. The rocks themselves fizzing and melting under its presence. He was keeping the monster busy though. Keeping it away from Rinoa and Squall. Hot tears poured down her cheeks. Squall was fighting back unconsciousness as grey danced around the corners of his vision. Rinoa was pouring her magic into him. She burned away the blue blood viciously. Then focused her entire being into repairing Squall's hands. The bones were melting now. She could feel them beginning to slip under her grasp. More magic. More. Rinoa was crying out her pain as she kept forcing more into him. Past what she thought was her own limitations. Zell cried out as he was struck by the monster's wildly swinging blade. Bleeding from his arm, he fell over, gritting his teeth. The monster ignored him and moved towards Rinoa and Squall. The bigger meal. Just sitting right there for him to devour. They weren't even facing him.
Squall! Rinoa! Run!
Zell yelled, trying to get back up. He ran towards the monster. It kicked its back hoof out and hit Zell square in the chest. All the air knocked from his lungs, Zell hit the ground. His heart felt like it had stopped for a moment and he was left flailing on the ground, struggling to draw in air that felt like was just sitting stagnant in his lungs. The monster crept closer to the downed couple. Zell started gagging, coughing. He still kept trying to get up. He had to keep the monster back. Away from them. Rinoa collapsed down to the ground. She stopped moving as the bright green of her healing magic disappeared like the source was drained dry. Squall was left sitting there on his legs, his arms resting on his thighs, out of Zell's sight. He wasn't even looking back at the monster. Did they not see it coming? Zell struggled to stand. His body collapsed. He couldn't do anything. The monster opened its large torso mouth, rearing up above them. Squall! Zell yelled desperately. The punishment shined in the dull red and blue light around them. The monster gagged and twitched, its mouth hanging open, the gun blade embedded into the roof of its mouth. Squall, back on his feet, was breathing hard. His gloves were nothing more than tatters on his wrists. But the skin of his hands was unblemished and whole. Squall let go of the hilt of his blade as the blue blood started dribbling down. He stepped back as the monster started twisting, trying to dislodge the gun blade buried in its brain. With no hands, it couldn't even touch it. The blue blood started eating through Squall's blade and he clenched his teeth as he watched his beloved punishment warp and melt. But as the blade was destroyed, the hole in the monster's head opened, allowing more blood to pour forth. It bled into its own mouth. Down its throat. Into its lungs. The monster crashed to the ground as Squall turned from it. Gagging, spitting, it glared at Squall hatefully as he leaned down and gently pulled Rinoa into his arms. The monster's limbs started falling still as Squall checked Rinoa for damage. She was breathing, her eyes half open. She wasn't focused on anything though. Squall nodded, satisfied. Being gentle with her, he walked her over to the staircase. He set her down on the bottom step before turning to the monster. It was still glaring at him in anger. Even bleeding from its brain, this monster wasn't dying. Squall closed his eyes, focusing on a point inside his own mind. He could feel Shiva there. Her icy presence a constant comfort and sweeter for being frosty. Like a cold drink on a hot day. Right there with her, his energy so different from hers, Bahamut was waiting for Squall to call on him with the infinite patience born from one used to captivity. He wasn't really hot. Squall wouldn't describe it as a heat. More like just simple raw energy. Not hot, not bright, just alive and vibrant and powering a force beyond Squall's understanding. He reached out for that power and felt it slip into his hand like a familiar friend. His eyes snapped open, the grey orbs deeper and raging like a storm as Squall pulled on Bahamut's purifying flame. The raw power of the King of Dragons. Purifying flame. Holy light. Living lightning. The breath of the King of Guardians.
Mega flare.
The bright light called down from above washed over the area. The icy pond melted. The overgrown greenery disintegrated. The monster, still growling through its own bubbling blood, was raised to ash, then to nothing at all, in the face of that light. Squall called the power back into himself. The monster's body, its alkaline blood, both destroyed in the path of Bahamut's flare. The glowing pink and blue orbs that remained danced in the air, unaffected by physical attacks. Then, almost lazily, they blew past Squall. Aiming for the one that had heard its call, the GF sank down into Rinoa's chest. She moaned gently, but she was too tired to try to react in any other way.
Okay, Next time,
Zell glared, wincing as he got to his feet.
Open with that.
Squall ignored him. Everything alive had been burned from Bahamut's breath. But his punishment had not been. The twin blades had been warped and melted from the blood though. Beyond repair. If it weren't for the mostly intact hilt, it wouldn't have resembled a sword at all. Squall picked it up sadly, turning it in his hands. Worthless now. Letting out a sigh, Squall tossed the blade away. The punishment sank down through the melted pond, rushing to the bottom. Let it rest here in honor at the site of its last victory. The cura spell slowly going into effect, Zell forced himself to stand upright.
All right, we got the GF. And I think a few broken bones. Can we go now? We still need a fuel cell,
Squall said firmly. Zell groaned loudly. Squall walked past him towards the cable unit next to the pond. Their battle had left it a little battered and dented, but it was still in one piece. More importantly, when Squall broke it open, the fuel cell inside was still operational. It took him a moment to disconnect the square black box about the size of a shoe box. It was heavy, weighing almost as much as a full-grown man. It weighed barely anything when Squall absorbed it into his inventory. Nodding, satisfied, Squall stood.
All right, let's get out of here. Finally.
Zell, already halfway up the stairs, yelled out. Squall ignored him and leaned over to pull Rinoa back into his arms. She had fallen asleep and leaned against him helplessly. Gently, Squall kissed her forehead as his completely intact hands held her snugly.
Thank you. Squall, really, I'm fine,
Rinoa assured him as Squall watched her stand up from their bunk. There was still some delicate bruising of exhaustion around her eyes despite the fact that she had slept through the rest of the afternoon and the night. Back aboard the Ragnarok, the night had passed rather peacefully. Even with both of her GF in her head, Rinoa didn't have weird nightmares because of how exhausted she was when she fell asleep. It was mid-morning before she finally woke up. It had been so long, past 12 hours, that Squall had begun to be worried. So that now when she finally was awake, he was hovering as she tried to stand up. It was a little difficult after spending so long in one position. She wouldn't let him help though. She wanted to get up on her own. It really only made his hovering worse. When she tried to leave, he kept a little close to her. She didn't mind his nearness. In fact, she loved how much he cared. But she wanted to walk on her own right now. Exercise her sore body and get the blood moving. The others were all gathered together in the cockpit, listening as Zell explained what had happened down below. When Squall and Rinoa joined them, he was busy embellishing the fight with the monster at the excavation site. Squall let him brag a little as he sat on the far left seat. Rinoa perched on his lap after he did, getting comfortable on his thigh. She leaned against his shoulder. No one seemed all that surprised at the casual intimacy.
So, I'm going to go out a limb and say that at least half of that isn't true,
Selphie said simply when Zell finished.
Yeah. I bet money Squall's the one who killed it.
Quistis nodded.
Or Rinoa,
Irvine added.
I'd believe she did it on her own before I believe that you managed to punch a monster so hard it flew 50 feet.
Zell slumped over as the others laughed at him. Rinoa gently brushed her lips against Squall's cheek as Zell tried to insist he had done it all by himself. When that failed, Squall released the fuel cell from the inventory. Irvine and Selfie examined it and said that the age of the battery was a little older than the ship's cells, but they should be able to hook it up with a little effort.
Guess that just leaves our destination,
Quistis said.
Still Shumi village.
Squall and Rinoa shared a look.
Actually,
Squall looked back at them.
Rinoa wants to live in Grandiddy Forest.
The others frowned.
But there's nothing in Grandiddy Forest but monsters and trees,
Selfie said simply.
Yeah,
Irvine leaned against his hand.
Do you know how hard it would be to live there? I'm up for it,
Squall shrugged.
Oh, hell,
Zell leaned back on his hands.
Well, I suppose the monsters there would be a real challenge. Sure, I'm game. It would take a little ingenuity to build a home there,
Quistis added thoughtfully.
I think I can come up with something if we take some supplies with us. Oh, but the Ragnarok can't fit there,
Selfie told them.
It can't land through the trees. More importantly, we still haven't found the chip,
Irvine pointed out.
If we really want to go off the grid, we need to find that first.
As the others started discussing plans and supplies, Rinoa and Squall shared another look. She was nearly crying with happiness that they were all coming with them. It felt like they were a real family to the two of them. Unwilling to leave even in the hardest of times. Rinoa put her arms around Squall and hugged him tight. They had the best friends. The best family. His hand was stroking her hip gently as he agreed silently. She could feel in the warmth in her heart, in his. It was a good feeling. When her eyes opened, looking past his shoulder to the communication terminal, she frowned to see the incoming transmission signal beeping. Beside it, the mute symbol was shown to be on. She sort of remembered Squall silencing it a long time ago back in space. He must not have ever turned it back on since they had no need to call anyone. She leaned back, looking at the signal curiously. Squall followed her line of sight and frowned at the blinking light. Do it, she urged him gently. She wanted to hear what it said. Reaching out, Squall pressed the mute button again, allowing the voice to come through.
In Ragnarok. This is Vice President Kiros of Esthar attempting to contact the airship Ragnarok, come in Ragnarok. This is Vice President Kiros of Esthar. Kiros.
Zell repeated, surprised. The radio signal had caught everyone's attention and they were all looking at the terminal in surprise. Not because he said his name was Kiros. Not just that. But also because it sounded like Kiros. The same tenor voice, calm and even. The Galbadian accent had dulled with time, but Squall could still detect hints of it when he spoke. He was repeating the same phrase over and over again. His voice changed a little each time telling Squall it wasn't a recording. The vice president of Esthar, whose name happened to be Kiros, was attempting to contact them.
Should we answer?
Quistis asked, staring in amazement.
He can't mean that Kiros, can he?
Zell asked, amazed.
One way to find out,
Irvine urged Squall forward. Selfie nodded beside him. Squall only hesitated another moment before hitting the button to accept the call. The signal clicked on and the man on the other end fell silent as he realized he had finally been heard. Squall's jaw tightened for a moment before he spoke.
This is Commander Leonhardt. I'm listening.
He heard something like a sigh of relief before the man launched into it quickly.
Commander Leonhardt, Thank you for taking my call. First of all, I would like to apologize most emphatically for. Get to the point, Vice President,
Squall interrupted him rudely. He wasn't exactly happy with Esthar at the moment.
Right. Of course. Ahem. As Vice President representing the President, I would like to extend an offer of employment to your organization, VIII.
Squall frowned. Whatever he had been expecting, it wasn't that.
I don't normally field VIII requests myself, Prime Minister. In fact, I'm thinking of retiring. It is a very high-profile job. Esthar is more than rich enough to afford whatever cost you put onto it. I would hire you and all 5 of your friends for this.
Squall's eyebrow raised.
Really? And what mission do you have in mind? I would like to hire VIII to defeat Sorceress Ultimecia. We have a plan prepared and need only someone brave enough to carry it out. And the agreement of Sorceress Rinoa. If she's obliging.
Squall's fist tightened.
If this is a plot to get Rinoa back. I assure you it's not. Sorceress Rinoa was seized under Dr. Odine's authority, not the authority of the government. We had nothing to do with it. We allowed you to take her back, didn't we?
Squall thought back to that blonde-bearded man who had let them escape. He had probably saved more Estharian lives than anything, but he had still let them go without a fight. An enormous blonde man with blue eyes who spoke not a word.
Our offer is genuine. Please, Commander. You are likely the only one we can trust this to, and we cannot do it without the sorceress. You may come armed if you wish. Please, the President is awaiting you all most eagerly. Commander.
Squall said nothing for a long moment. He looked out over the others. The chance to meet the Kiros. The chance to defeat the sorceress that had destroyed their lives. And what did they have to fear even from an entire army?
All right, Vice President. We'll be there by tomorrow.
End of chapter.